What's the last straw that made you go, that person is definitely crazy? Story 1. I was at a Halloween party several years ago with a secondary or tertiary friend group. You know the kind. I was kind of friends with some of them, only barely knew others. But it was a costume party and I didn't have anywhere else to be. So I went. There was a guy who was near to the center of said group that was always a little off. Everyone called him Prison in his name because he had been to prison. I had run into him a few years before when I was maybe 14, and he offered me $20 to do something inappropriate. He was at least 20 at that time. Real class act. Well, during the party, he pulls out a loaded gun and starts waving it around, saying he could end it all right there or something like that. Two guys managed to get it from him. Now he's upset and running around the house yelling. A third guy steps in and decides to break down the gun. So one guy has all the bullets, one guy gets the actual gun. Someone else took the clip. No one else reacted. They were just like, "Welp." Typical prison name behavior. So that's the day I decided that entire circle was completely out of their minds. Story 2. My husband's cousin is the only female in the family that is around my age. So when we used to go to family functions, I tended to hang out with her. Our friendship grew, and she was who I considered to be my best friend. We both had 3 kids and they all loved each other, so we just spent a lot of time together. My husband always told me she was unpredictable, that she would turn on me. But I just thought they grew up together and had some weird kind of sibling rivalry thing going on. Her ex-husband disliked her. Court cases for custody were happening all the time. It was nasty. They weren't allowed to be in the same room together per court order. I only heard her side of the story, so I, of course, assumed it was him that was horrible. Fast forward a few years, she is remarried and has a new baby with her new husband. She's an interior decorator and has always been struggling financially. But somehow, all of a sudden, she is buying all the things. New iPods for all the kids, including mine. Gaming laptop for her oldest. Furniture, electronics. She pays a year of rent so she won't have to think about it. While I'm over there because I'm now an approved supervisor for the supervised visitation her ex-husband has imposed through the court, she starts yelling at her new husband for not loading the dishwasher correctly and pushes him with real force down the stairs. He somehow manages to be okay, but she doesn't stop. She runs after him with clear intent to attack. The guy has to literally flee his own home. I packed up the 3 older kids and my kids and got out of there. I didn't report it because she guilted me into thinking she had postpartum depression and would be fine. One Valentine's Day, she decides she wants to have a party for the kids. The time didn't work out for me, so I told her we couldn't attend. She lost her temper and called me every name she could think of. She took things I had said to her in confidence and told our whole family. I got pages and pages of scathing emails. I was crushed. 5 years later, she remarried again and had 2 more babies with a new guy. She called child services on her 15-year-old son, claiming he harmed her 2-year-old daughter, had zero evidence but decided because the child was acting weird that this must have been what happened. After a heated altercation with the new guy where police were called, she now has lost custody of all 6 kids and begs me to come to court to be a character witness. Story 3. One of my co-workers, a middle-aged woman whom we'll call Karen, is definitely not my favorite person to talk to or work with, as our personalities and views always seem to be complete opposites. Karen makes these completely irrelevant, irrational, and extreme statements out of the blue all the time, often just to disagree with me or one of the many other people she can't get along with. Another co-worker's cat passed away some time ago, and after an autopsy, it appeared that the cat had eaten a poisoned sponge. You'll often hear about people who dislike cats or dogs putting out poisoned snacks in certain areas here in the Netherlands. That co-worker obviously had a hard time coping with the loss, and while we were talking about it with a group of co-workers, Karen barges in and says that she can completely understand why people poison cats or dogs, because she can't stand the fact that cats come in her backyard and leave a mess there. She even stated that she'd do it too. Ever since then, I've known she's someone to be cautious around. Story 4. Not too extreme, but I had a coworker who regularly talked about how so many of her friends had wronged her in the past. At first I believed her and felt bad until she told us what her latest ex-friend did, after basically calling him every name in the book, of course. She and her husband decided one day to replace their furniture. This was a spur-of-the-moment decision, and since they didn't have a truck to move their stuff, they texted their friend to see if he could help them, along with his truck. Friend said, "No, can't do, I'm busy today." She showed up at his house and flipped out when she saw that he was home relaxing. That's how entitled she thought she was to his vehicle and his time. She yelled about every single thing she had ever done for him. Petty stuff like, bought you a soda when you forgot your wallet. Police had to be called. From then on out, I was careful not to accept any favors from her, because I'm 98% sure the only reason she would ever do a nice thing is to throw it back in your face when you have to tell her no. She used to give one of our coworkers a ride home, and I witnessed this coworker on multiple occasions offer gas money, pay for her lunch, etc. as a thank you. She always declined with, "I'm going that way anyway," until one day the coworker upset her, so she ran around telling everyone that coworker was a mooch and never once paid gas money. Maybe this is more manipulative than irrational, but she was always so miserable that she never even got what she wanted at the end of the day, so I consider it some kind of irrational behavior. Story 5. I worked at a gas station when I was in high school. Every day around the same time for a couple of months, this really good-looking guy would come in to use the restroom and then head out. Eventually, I started being friendlier, and he'd stop for a second to chat, and eventually he'd ask if I'd like to hear a poem. I'd gush about how great it was, and he'd go about his way. This guy was gorgeous, so that clouded my judgment. His poems made no sense and got weirder as time went on. My co-worker/best friend urged me to stop being so friendly as he gave her the creeps. I, being 15 and distracted by how attractive he was, ignored this. This went on for months until one day he ran in with his hair in pigtails and whiskers drawn on his face and locked himself in the bathroom for over an hour. I knocked on the door several times and heard him talking, as if on the phone. This was before cell phones were common. I had a pager. Finally, he burst out clutching a half-dissolved urinal cake up to his ear and said, "Someone left me a clue. I finally found it. Farewell." He ran away down the street and we never saw him again. Yeah, so not an eccentric poet. Story 6. I made friends with a guy who was on the fringe of our college friend group. He seemed bright and we shared interests. He was a junior chess champion, and I always wanted to learn, so he was teaching me. We chatted online sometimes. His parents were divorced and his father lived in Europe somewhere, and he flew over for a few weeks. I was hanging out, cleaning out a closet at my house when he messaged me. He told me a few years back he was dating a girl, and she was unpredictable and unkind. He'd gotten out and broken all contact, blocked her, and changed all of his screen names. But she'd found him and messaged him, and he was upset when I talked to him. I said of course and ended up chatting with him for a few hours. A few weeks later he'd been back and we'd hung out some, and he expressed interest in me romantically. I told him I was seeing someone else at the time. I actually was. He continued to be clingy and odd. It got to a point where I wasn't sure if I was starting to dislike him because he was annoying, or if he was annoying because I disliked him. He kept acting like we were dating despite my other committed relationship that predated our friendship. I took a step back from the friendship. He messaged me telling me he'd reconnected with a girl he'd worked on a group project with while walking around campus, and she'd given him her number again. They planned to get coffee. I was delighted and encouraged him to pursue it, because then he'd leave me alone. After the date, he checked in with me. I assumed since I'd been enthusiastic and he had no other close friends. They got coffee, talked for hours, and had a good time. Good. I told him how happy I was for him. He said, "You're not upset?" I asked why I would be. "You're not jealous?" "No, of course not. I'm happy for my friend." "You were supposed to be jealous." Okay. I made the whole thing up to make you jealous." Well, that was a little extreme. I also made up the time my ex-girlfriend contacted me in Sweden, because if you don't punch people in the face, they don't talk to you. If you don't metaphorically push people, they don't talk to you. That was a thing he said. Why would he admit to being a compulsive liar? I think he wanted me to be impressed by that. I blocked him on all media and ended that friendship. It was a wild 2 or 3 months. Story 7. I'm a nurse, so this is kind of a daily occurrence for me, especially when you're working in the emergency department and dealing with people who have just walked through the door and you're trying to figure out whether they're fully oriented or not. I've had too many examples to list, but one was an elderly mother and her middle-aged son. They seemed completely normal. They often do at first. The mother was getting admitted and the son was getting ready to go home. He pulled me aside and told me his mother likes to spit in a jar on Friday evenings after she watches the news and asked if it would be okay for her to do that while in hospital. Kind of strange but harmless, so I said I didn't see why not. I'd get her a paper cup or something, and she could do that tonight after the news. It was a Friday. "Oh no," he said, "into this jar." He then presented an old jar, about a quarter full of spit, wrong on so many levels. Let's just say I got a real unsettling vibe from those two. Also, outside of work, I went to a house party one New Year's Eve when I was young. There was a girl there I'd met before, and she seemed really cool. They often do at first. Everyone was having fun, but she decided she wanted to go out to a club. She basically threw a tantrum until we all gave in and decided to drive her to this club. She calmed down in the car until we got about halfway there. Then she suddenly got upset again, saying she didn't want to go to a club. Why couldn't we have stayed home? And why did she have to do what everyone else wanted? Story 8. I dated a guy for 2 months and he started talking about marriage. That was a red flag, but I didn't say anything. I had to move to a different country for high school, and he began to accuse me of being unfaithful and going to bars, where I supposedly met random men. Mind you, I was 15 at the time, and I was in the US, so there was no way I did that. He claimed that he had friends in the same town who informed him of this. But that's not all. A friend of mine sent me pictures of him with his ex behind a nightclub. I didn't say a word, hoping he'd come clean. The accusations became so bad that I broke it off. A year later, he was still stalking me. He told me he joined the army just to prove to me that he wanted to get better for me, all while he was dating someone else already. He started to threaten self-harm so I would come back to him. This continued for a few months, and he'd do this almost daily. I got so fed up that I told him to go ahead and do whatever he wanted. 10 minutes later, I got a call from his supervisor threatening me with a lawsuit because I had supposedly pushed him to it. I was in the middle of an important internship and I lost it. I told them that if they wanted to play that game, I would sue him for being involved with a minor, as I was 15 when we dated and he was 19. The man on the phone said he would delete my phone number from his contacts and I'd never be bothered again. After a few weeks of silence, I got a message from his friends saying I should get back with my ex. Turns out it was my ex messaging me from his friend's account. The next day, his friend actually told me that there was never an army supervisor and he just wanted to scare me. There were so many other things, but those are the highlights. I came back home for a summer 2 years later, and when he saw me at a cafe talking to one of my old friends, he threw a chair at me and then tried to grab me while saying he loved me. That was the final straw. Story 9. He started digging bits of silver foil out of the tarmac at the side of the road. He'd been perfectly fine a few days earlier, and I got to watch his decline without fully realizing what I was seeing until that moment. This was in India, and he was Indian but mostly spent time with Westerners, so we would often talk about spiritual matters. I noticed that these spiritual conversations were becoming more and more esoteric until I couldn't really follow what he was saying, but it still didn't click. The day before I found him digging up silver foil, why is it always foil? I met him on the way home from a bar. He was definitely acting strangely then, and that was when I first realized something was wrong. He started an esoteric conversation again, none of which made sense. It was just the two of us talking beneath a tree on a dark road with nobody else around. He handed me an invisible telephone and told me my mother wanted to talk to me, so I played along, because I was a bit intoxicated. Then his eyes went wide and he shook his head, placed one hand on each side of my face and said, "No, you never talk to your mother ever again." I was frightened and went home. A couple of days later, he disappeared, as he was taken to a mental hospital and he only turned up again a few weeks later, shaven-headed. This apparently happened every now and again. Nowadays, I can spot the signs a lot faster when people are skirting the edges of instability, and I make sure to back away so I don't end up in a situation like that again. Story 10. There wasn't really a last straw, but this girl I was chatting with online kept trying to get me to video chat. Eventually I agreed, and it was the strangest video chat I've ever had. She didn't, or wouldn't, say a word the entire time. She switched off the light, and I heard the sound of her bedroom door opening and closing. Then she came back. She made a point of shaking up her bottle of protein shake. Eventually, I ended the chat wondering what had just happened. Maybe she was trying to be suggestive. I thought about blocking her, but foolishly, I carried on talking to her and gave her the benefit of the doubt. I'd never had a girlfriend or been in a relationship before, so I imagined that was part of why I ignored my instincts. One day, she randomly took offense at an admittedly clumsy attempt at being supportive about some of her medical issues and blocked me. I thought, well, problem solved. Nope. A month or two later, she popped up and apologized for overreacting, saying she forgave me for being so insensitive. By this point, my better judgment was practically screaming at me. Once again, I ignored it, and the chat continued as before. Then she wanted to video chat again. I agreed. It went pretty much the exact same way as last time. No words from her, just strange actions. Then it ended. I blocked her as soon as she went offline. I wasn't ignoring that red flag again. Story 11. I was heading out to get groceries with my roommates, and on our way out of the house, we found a homeless man digging through our trash. It was a bit surprising since it's not every day you find someone looking for empties under your porch. We decided he was harmless since all he was doing was looking around. Plus, he was actually going out of his way to clean up our admittedly messy parking lot. Not just bottles and cans, but dirt, weeds, and our neighbors' trash that they'd left unprotected under their porch, which was now swarming with wasps and half-eaten by animals. We got him some empties from inside, gave him a cold drink, locked the door, and went to get groceries. When we got back, we found that he was still there after an hour and a half, still cleaning our parking lot. We were amazed and grateful, so we struck up a conversation. He seemed like a normal guy. He used to be a business owner, fixed roofs for a living, made decent money before he was homeless, used to be married, had kids. Unfortunately, his life spiraled after he got mixed up in substance use. We just figured he was a regular guy who'd made some bad choices and then got caught in a tough system. That is, until he mentioned that the construction on our main street was actually a plot by the city to find the Templars' treasure, that he himself was a Templar descendant, and that I specifically was the unknowing descendant of Templars. We let him talk and tell us stories for 2 hours before he stopped. It was wild. He was great, though. Even after his rambling, he finished cleaning our parking lot and offered to do it again for cheap if we needed it. Story 12. We were newly married, and my husband worked at an office where there was one fun guy we liked to hang out with. Call him S. S lived at home and asked if he could rent out our basement apartment. It seemed like a great idea because of the extra money, and he was a fun guy. It was all good for about a week. Then my husband had to leave for a few days of training in another city. That's when S seemed to think he had to be the man of the house. I was a busy trauma nurse, on call a lot and hardly home. But when I was, S would barbecue dinner and get irritated if I didn't want it. That type of behavior escalated. My husband was only gone 3 days, came back, and S's behavior kept getting worse. One night, I was going out for girls' night, and my husband had a black tie event with his company. S, not being as high up, planned on staying home. This was in the late 90s, so I'm not entirely sure how he found out where I was with my group at a downtown bar. Around midnight, he suddenly showed up and told me it was time to go, that it was late. The table of my work friends went totally silent, everyone staring at me. Also, S was wearing all of my husband's clothes: jacket, shirt, pants, socks, and shoes. It was bizarre. I sent him away, but the night was pretty awkward after that. He wasn't home when I got back, thankfully. I told my husband everything when he returned, and we went to bed. The next morning, we heard thumps and loud voices. We came out to find S moving out with a bunch of his high school friends. They were taking his things, but also grabbing our stuff: laundry soap, food, etc. S saw we were up, marched over, and gave us a lecture about how we won't do well without him, then finally left. I later heard he was let go from work. I actually feel a bit bad. He probably had some sort of mental health issue, but still. Story 13. My best friend's girlfriend was always a bit controlling when they were together. For example, she once made him delete all pictures of himself with other girls who were just friends from way before they were together. In the end, it didn't work out and they split up. He had moved to New York while she was still in London. One day, he got a call from her number with the location showing as NYC. He didn't pick up but texted her saying, "I thought you canceled this trip." She had booked it before they broke up. She replied, "No, I kept it. I thought you'd want to see me, but clearly not. Thanks for ruining my trip." Shocked, he asked why she came since they hadn't spoken in months. She was evasive over text. Eventually, he asked where she was in NYC, and she said, "Lucky I'm not actually in NYC. I'd be on my own all week. You've shown you don't care. Don't talk to me again." It turned out she had paid to make the call through a service that fakes the location, so it looked like she was there, just to see if he'd meet up. This was a few years ago, and they haven't spoken since. Story 14. I met a guy in college at a bar. He seemed cool, liked his style. He started telling me all these stories about being in the army. He said he was a medic. One day we were walking past the Soldiers and Sailors building, and he began talking about how many people he had seen pass away in his care. His brothers, as he called them. Then he cried. I pretty much knew he was lying from the start. But I figured some guys have a hard time talking to women, so I gave him a chance to walk it back once we became friends. When he cried about people he'd supposedly lost, right in front of a memorial, I was disgusted. Real people had died doing brave things, and here he was making it up. Then he admitted it wasn't true, which surprised me, probably because it was obvious. He was only slightly older than me. I told him we couldn't be friends. The next day, he claimed he had sold all his stuff to buy my friendship back because I was struggling financially at the time. I didn't take the money. Later, I found out his parents were wealthy and he had just asked them for $700. Story 15. I was seeing this guy once, and he brought up the idea of having an open relationship, which in his mind meant he could see whoever he wanted. Fine with me. It was the start of summer, and I just wanted to date casually too. One night, I went for a walk to the pier near my house with another guy. We were having a good time, just chatting and getting to know each other. I'd put my phone on silent because I was enjoying myself. Suddenly, I heard a noise off to the side. I looked up, and there he was, standing in his pajamas, staring at us. It took me a moment to realize it was the guy I had the open relationship with, and he was clearly upset. Turns out he didn't like that I was also seeing other people in this open relationship of his. He started yelling at me and at the guy I was with, telling him to leave. That was the last red flag I needed to decide this arrangement wasn't going to work. Story 16. A classmate gave me a ride home once because my car was in the shop. She tells a joke and it's pretty funny, so we laugh about it for a good 5 minutes. Then she keeps telling the same joke for the next 15. Lo and behold, there's a 15-mile traffic jam on the way back. So here we are, stuck going between 0 and 5 miles per hour for the better part of 2 hours, while she's still telling the same joke. I pretend to fall asleep and tune out into my own world behind closed eyes. But she is trying her hardest to shake me awake because she's not done dragging that joke through the ground. Sorry, but I'm committed to the role at this point. Tossing slightly, occasional light snore here and there. For all appearances, I'm out. She eventually pulls up to my place, and I decide to finally let her wake me up. So I pretend to groggily pull myself together. She goes, "If you don't wake up, I'm going to light this on fire and poke you." I'm not paying attention until I hear the flint of a lighter. I look to my left, and she's holding a plastic spork up in front of her like the Olympic torch. I don't know what chemicals are in this thing, but the flame is blue, and I'm staring at it in disbelief, thinking there's no way she's going to stab me with that, right? Wrong. Next thing I know, she's jabbing the pointy end into my forearm, fire and all. My brain processes this for a second before I yell, "What are you doing?" I rip the now congealing plastic out of my arm and stomp out of the car. She texts me with an apology, saying she didn't know what came over her. I politely erase her from my memory. So yeah, one of many ridiculous stories permanently etched into my arm. Story 17. A buddy of mine was very socially opinionated, but not very socially active. He knew what was wrong with everything, yet took no action. As a child, his parents divorced. His father was physically abusive, and his mother was neglectful or absent. I mention it because that was often his excuse for his bad behavior and choices. Everybody else had to take responsibility for their actions, but he didn't because he had no love growing up. One day, we walked a couple of blocks from his work to a truck stop for a snack. The side of the road was covered in trash, and he added it to his list of complaints about the world. On the way back, he finished his drink and dropped the bottle on the ground with the rest of the garbage. I stopped, thinking it was a joke, but he turned back and said, "What?" I told him he had just been complaining about litter, and now he was adding to it. He said, "Whether I drop the bottle or not, the litter will still be there." I picked it up along with a few other things and carried them back to his office, fuming. That might not have been the final straw, but he spent the next hour arguing with me about how I was being ridiculous and judgmental, and that he couldn't change the situation. That was when I realized he was not the socially aware person he claimed to be, and we spoke only a few more times before I ghosted him. Story 18. My friend's cousin pointed a fake, but very realistic-looking, gun in my face and demanded the drugs and phone I had stolen from him the very first time I ever met him at a party. The whole party came to a halt, and then my friend awkwardly asked me in front of everyone if he should take care of it for me after I pointed out that the gun was fake. The barrel opening was too small to be real, so I relaxed a little, but I still had a possibly loaded BB gun in my face. He was saying his girlfriend had lost her phone and some drugs, and since I was the only new face there, he knew it was me, even though he actually had her phone and the drugs the whole time. His girlfriend told him to put the gun down and called him out in front of everyone. If you've ever seen someone with that kind of bravado get shamed by a girl in front of a crowd, you know it's not something they handle well. He exploded in anger because he thought he looked foolish, and then started threatening to fight everyone, arguing with his girlfriend and my friend. I stuck around for a bit to be polite, but left early because the rest of the night would have just been him defending himself and arguing, while my friend apologized to me repeatedly. That guy was completely unpredictable. Story 19. She smelled something that no one else in her house could smell and took that as absolute, undeniable evidence that federal agents were inside her bedroom waiting for her. She then shared some heavily self-censored, but clearly well-researched plans about building a nuclear bunker beneath her yard. I knew she had some severe health problems, but I had never known her to have hallucinations or persecutory delusions before. I've had that happen a few times when I was in crisis, and I've known others with similar experiences. It's not a moral failing or even that frightening to witness, but for me, it was the last straw because it made it clear that I needed to keep some distance and focus on my own mental health. Our dynamic was extremely unhealthy anyway. My codependent tendencies often made me feel like I needed a list of serious problems to justify setting a boundary. I was just beginning to acknowledge my codependency and learn to set boundaries like a normal person, and this was a very well-timed red flag, or rather a whole parade of flags. Things only got worse from there, and we are no longer in contact. I hope she's doing well, but I seriously doubt it. I feel far better for having ended that friendship and starting to work on my own boundaries and codependency. Story 20. This literally happened last night. My neighbor is unpredictable. I was out to eat and had 2 missed calls from her. She then texted me, upset, asking if I was on a date. I said no. She told me it would be fine if I was, except that she had already told her boyfriend that she and I had a date. I had no idea what she was talking about. 2 hours later, she rings my doorbell, dressed up as if we really did have a date. She was clearly not herself and walked straight to my bathroom. I could hear her phone blowing up. She eventually answered, and I could tell it was her boyfriend, who was at home next door. He convinced her to leave. About 15 minutes later, there's a knock on the side door. It's him. He asked for her purse. I look, and yes, she left it in the bathroom. I hand it to him and explain I had no idea what was going on. He apologizes, and that's that. Until 15 minutes later, when she comes back, angry that I gave him her purse. As I try to calm her down, he walks up. I tell him, "What did you want me to do?" She came here unannounced, left it, and you came for it. Then she asks if I'm going to let her in. He says, "What's going on?" She told me you guys are going to watch TV for 4 hours, and I know that's not true. I tell them I have no idea where any of this is coming from and that I'm going to bed. They finally leave. Haven't heard anything since. Story 21. My next-door neighbor had a live-in girlfriend for a while, and one day she completely flipped out. To set up my story, it's important to know my schedule. I work early in the morning and am home by 10 a.m., leaving for work around 1 to 2 a.m. One morning, I was sitting on my porch smoking a cigarette and listening to a YouTube video about World of Warcraft. My neighbor's girlfriend was on her porch, asked me about it, and we chatted briefly. She suggested my wife and I come over to hang out sometime. I'm a pretty reclusive person, so I just vaguely agreed. Later that morning, I went to bed but woke up to loud banging from their apartment. My neighbor is usually quiet, so I figured it was a one-off and went back to sleep. That night, when I stepped outside before work, I found my neighbor surrounded by about 7 police officers and several vehicles. His girlfriend was in the back of a police car, talking incoherently and clearly under the influence. When I left for work, I chatted with my neighbor, and he explained she had been controlling before, but that day she went over the edge, damaging much of his apartment, claiming he threatened her with a gun, which he owned but had not used, and calling the police. They found drugs in plain sight, and later he found pills hidden around the apartment. She had also taken his truck and hidden the keys. He eventually found the truck parked at the far end of the complex, but the keys were still missing. While in jail, she told him she had buried them at the bottom of a potted plant on another neighbor's porch. Story 22. On my mother's side in Korea, I have a cousin who is painfully shy and struggles with anxiety. She got engaged to a similarly shy man, and after talking it over, they decided not to have a wedding ceremony because it would be too overwhelming for both of them. When they announced this to my aunt, my mom's sister-in-law, my aunt completely lost her temper. For months, she repeated things like, "How dare you bring shame upon your family? Everyone will think you're pregnant. Do you know how much money I've given as wedding gifts? It's my turn. Weddings are for the parents. It's not about you. How dare you be ungrateful when we're giving you a nice ceremony?" And so on. In the end, my cousin gave in and had the wedding, but she was so anxious and tearful that she still can't look at her wedding photos. When I got engaged, I told my parents we weren't having a ceremony. They shrugged and offered to give us the wedding fund as a down payment for a house instead. I asked my mom if she thought it was shameful, and she said it would be more shameful to force me to do something I didn't want. Apparently, my aunt made comments about our decision, but my mom didn't care and told her so. My mom never approved of my uncle marrying my aunt, and they've never gotten along. Story 23. My dad was always into conspiracy theories, things like the government hiding the truth from people. He was also a devout Christian and homeschooled us because he didn't trust the public school system. Fast forward to my college years. My dad wasn't making ends meet with his businesses, and my mom wanted a divorce. It turned out he had found an online forum claiming there was a secret trust fund with trillions of dollars about to be released to the people it belonged to. He spent days doing nothing but talking on these forums about how the system would collapse and they'd never have to worry about money again. I don't even want to know how much money he spent buying cheap foreign currencies because he thought they would skyrocket in value. And where did the money come from? He essentially ran a Ponzi scheme using money from naive investors to pay his bills. To him, it wasn't stealing. He convinced himself the money was his because the investors took the risk. The final straw, he now believes that certain political leaders in the Supreme Court will arrest 56,000 bad people who have been holding the world back. Once this veil is lifted, he says, people will develop superpowers like in the movies. Story 24. Probably when she started yelling that she wanted to harm herself and demanded that I help her do it, over and over, because I disagreed with her on something minor. This was someone I thought was a close friend. I tried to calm her down because I didn't want to risk another friend taking their own life, something I had been through before. That only made her angrier, so I went quiet to avoid escalating things further. The next day she messaged me, calling me borderline abusive. I decided I wouldn't speak to her until she apologized, as her actions were far beyond acceptable. About 6 months later, she contacted me to apologize. I tried to let it go and be understanding. We talked a bit, but then work and life got in the way and we didn't speak much for a few months. When I eventually reached out, she replied that she didn't want to be friends anymore, again calling me borderline abusive, even though we'd barely spoken since her apology. She said she needed to cut out terrible influences. I think she might have been projecting her feelings about her boyfriends onto me. None of it made sense, and the inconsistency in how she treated me over the past year really messed with my head. Story 25. I was hanging out with friends trying to move on from a girl I knew because she was always drunk and unkind. She called me 30 times in one night, and my friends told me not to answer because she wasn't good for me. Eventually, they became concerned and told me to pick up. She was drunk and about 30 miles away. She told me to come get her, and I said I was busy. She said she would just drive over. And if she got into an accident, it would be my fault for not picking her up. I told her she wasn't welcome to come over. She said she'd drive home instead, but again told me that if she hurt someone while drunk driving, it would be my fault. That was when I realized how self-centered she was. One time she was drunk at my apartment, yelling at me, so I paid for an Uber to take her home. Later, she texted me saying that if I really loved and cared about her, I would have physically fought her and locked her in my bathroom to stop her from leaving. Story 26. When my upstairs landlord was overcharging me, I had to take her to tribunal to get the money she owed me since she didn't want to hand it over. I won because I had all the evidence, and it was obvious she was in the wrong. Her dad wrote me a check right there in the courtroom. While in the negotiation room after the session, he got so angry that he lunged across the table to grab me by the throat. I'm female, by the way. Security escorted him out. Not long after, I was back at tribunal because she filed a $10,000 claim for damages to the house, completely made up because she was angry I won the last case. The judge asked her for evidence like photos and receipts, but she couldn't provide any because she was fabricating the claims. The most ridiculous part was when she demanded $5,000 from me parking in her driveway about 5 times. The judge asked why she needed that amount, and she said it was because she had to park 5 minutes away in a park instead of in the driveway. The judge was trying not to laugh at that point. He dismissed the case entirely and gave her a lecture. Her dad was escorted out by security again for yelling at the judge aggressively. After that, I moved out because she was completely unreasonable. She would call the police on me routinely, claiming I was damaging the house, and she would walk around outside filming me. Once at around 2 a.m., she was stomping upstairs and screaming at me, keeping me awake. She called the police, claiming I was banging on the ceiling. When they arrived at 3 a.m., I showed them my 10-foot ceilings and explained that even if I stood on the couch with a broom, I couldn't reach them. They agreed. She then took me back to tribunal after I left, claiming I had damaged the house. I hadn't. She lied and produced a picture of a crack in a marble fireplace that had been there before I moved in. It would have taken a jackhammer to cause that kind of crack. Despite pointing out the flaws in her story, she won this case. I was angry but decided not to appeal because I wanted to be done with the situation. After I moved out, she called demanding my new address for some vague reason. I refused and blocked her number for good measure. Story 27. My last roommate would argue any point if it didn't align with his own opinion. I would come home and every light in the house, on all 3 floors, would be on. One day during daylight, I came home and found him in the basement playing computer games. I said, "Hey man, would you mind turning the lights off when you're not using them?" He replied, "I am using them." We bought a brand new oven and he put pizza directly on the rack. I had a pizza pan, so I asked him, "Hey man, would you mind using the pan so cheese doesn't fall into the oven?" He said, "Cheese doesn't fall off pizza." Later, when we lost 2 employees at my job, I had to work straight 12-hour shifts for 10 days with only a few short turnarounds. I warned him in advance, asking him to time his laundry when I wasn't sleeping and letting him know I planned to sleep Sunday during the day before my night shift. On that Sunday, he spent the entire day on the roof hammering. Monday, he called in sick and invited a girl over. He wore shoes upstairs, something he normally didn't do. Wednesday, he ran laundry all day. I ended up staying with family for the next week. Once I was explaining positive and negative pressure to him. He interrupted and said negative pressure couldn't exist. I realized he was talking about absolute pressure while I was talking about gauge pressure, so I explained the difference. He listened, then said, "My professor said you can't go below 0 pressure, so you're wrong." Every single disagreement went this way. I was at my limit and knew we couldn't communicate. I wrote him a letter saying we were terrible roommates. It didn't matter why, and he couldn't talk me out of it. But we needed to go our separate ways. He could keep the place, or I could. He texted me, "Hey, I got your letter." What does it mean? I had questioned his stability before, but in that moment I knew for sure. Story 28. Two-parter about the same person. The first part is secondhand, something I heard from my mom. When I was a baby, she used to carry me on her back and walk around our rural property, about 5 acres. One day, she was walking along the fence between our place and the neighbor's. The neighbor, an older woman of about 50, was walking along the other side. My mom stopped to chat, and according to her, the neighbor wouldn't stop staring at me. In the middle of the conversation, the neighbor suddenly blurted out, "I'm going to get one of those one day," referring to me. My mom quickly ended the conversation and walked away. Fast forward 9 years. I'm about 10 or 11. I've heard the story, and the neighbor always creeped me out. She now has a young boy. I'm assuming through adoption, since she didn't have a partner, and he's about 5 years old. My parents had recently bought me a small motorbike, and I'd been riding it around the block without issue. One day, like usual, I take it for a spin. I do 2 laps, and on my third pass along the fence we share with the neighbor, she suddenly comes running out of the bushes, holding a bucket, and starts throwing fist-sized rocks at me. One nearly hit my head. I had a helmet on, but still. It terrified me. I rode straight home and told my parents. My dad went to the fence to confront her, and she told him she could throw rocks at whomever she wanted, and threatened to do it again, saying, "This time I won't miss." We didn't call the police, and to this day, I don't know why my parents didn't. We even told family friends who were police officers later, and they said we should have filed a report. From then on, I avoided her at all costs. Story 29. My boyfriend had a close friend who lived in another state when we first met. I heard so many great things about him that I was excited when he moved back 2 years into our relationship. Unfortunately, that excitement ended almost immediately. It was clear to me that he was narcissistic and constantly trying to assert dominance over my boyfriend, though my boyfriend didn't see it. The friend had been supportive during hard times in the past, and my boyfriend is extremely loyal. Over the next few months, the friend openly flirted with me, told my boyfriend what to do, and took over any interaction he had with anyone. I was at my breaking point but tried to go along to get along. Finally, something happened that even my loyal boyfriend couldn't overlook. He was getting a haircut when the friend called. Obviously, he didn't answer. The friend called several more times, then began sending hateful texts accusing my boyfriend of being a terrible friend and throwing in unrelated personal insults, even insulting me, all because my boyfriend hadn't answered his phone during a haircut. That was the final straw. My boyfriend ended the friendship that day, and there's been no contact since. Story 30. My mom convinced me and people around me that I was bipolar. I went along with it, saw a psychiatrist, got medication, and lived at home for a couple of months. My mom is very clingy and codependent. I started to distance myself from her, drawing, meditating, anything that didn't involve her. After about a week of this, I got a call from my doctor asking how I was feeling and if I was starting to become manic. She said my mom had called to say she was concerned because I wasn't sleeping. I had been sleeping just fine. When I confronted my mom, she denied it. That's when I realized she had manipulated me into thinking I couldn't take care of myself, labeling me as mentally ill so she could take care of me, meaning having me live with her, go to work with her, and use me to validate herself. I moved 1,000 miles away on my own. My mom began calling several times a week, always sounding sad, as if trying to get me to come back. I stopped taking her calls, and she sent me a gif of a woman sobbing, asking if I needed help. It felt so strange and inappropriate, especially since I'm doing fine. I think it's because I am fine, and my mom can't stand that. Story 31. I had this roommate for a while, and everyone disliked her. I defended her for a long time, saying, "Nah, she's cool. She's just having a rough time." What finally made me decide I was done was when she came home drunk one night, which happened a lot, even with work the next day, and started yelling at me for an hour, calling me awful things because I eat beef and cheese. She went on, quoting animal rights propaganda and saying all farms are horrible for animals. I grew up on a farm, I've been to many, and most are well run with healthy, well-treated animals. I moved out a month later, and in that time she did even more bizarre stuff. For example, she went away for a weekend, and I stayed at my girlfriend's place while she was gone. She'd left a big mess of dishes and trash, which I figured she'd clean when she got home. Instead, she got back and started messaging my friends, not hers, mine, saying I trashed the place while she was gone. At that point, I still hadn't even been home since before she left. Story 32. This one is kind of sad, but it fits. Years ago, I worked at a call center and met a younger coworker, maybe 20, who was very energetic, almost manic, but really fun, and we quickly became friends. She constantly talked about her twin sister, stories, inside jokes, weekend plans, vacations. Every conversation circled back to her twin. It was a little much, but I figured she was just very close to her. Years later, after leaving that job, I became an accountant and financial advisor. I had a new client in his early 60s, and during our meeting, I found out he was her dad. Small world. While discussing his family and retirement, I noticed he only mentioned his wife and one daughter, the one I knew. So I asked about her twin. He got quiet and told me their other daughter had died in a car accident in 2008. Doing the math, her sister had died 4 years before I met her. Yet she always spoke of her in the present tense. My twin is so afraid of spiders. My twin and I went to the amusement park last weekend. My twin went on a date. How do I tell her he's bad news? Suddenly, all her manic energy and obsession made sense. She was keeping her twin alive by pretending she was still here. Even now, over a decade later, she still posts about her twin on social media as if nothing happened. It's heartbreaking, but also deeply unsettling. Story 33. My stepmom is bipolar and probably dealing with other issues. But one night after a party she and my dad hosted, I had to use the bathroom. I walked in, but it was dark and she was inside, vomiting. As any normal kid would, I walked away to give her privacy. Apparently that was enough to set her off. About 10 minutes later, she came storming out, yelling and cursing at me, accusing me of not wanting to help and claiming she was choking. I apologized, but it only made her angrier. She started packing her things, telling my dad she was going to harm herself. After an hour of silence, we assumed she had passed out. She had been drinking heavily. But suddenly she came back, didn't say a word, grabbed my dad's phone and threw it at him, hitting him in the head. It was the first time I had ever seen my dad truly furious. They argued, and she tried to drive away despite being drunk. The police were called, she was arrested, and her license was taken away. About 12 years later, I brought that night up to her and explained how it had affected me. Even in her 60s, she still blamed everything on me and my dad. She hasn't changed at all. Story 34. My wife's ex-roommate was one of those bleach blonde, spray tan types who would get blackout drunk on a Tuesday night just because she felt like it. One weeknight, she came back from the bar and tried to get into her apartment. The problem was, it wasn't her apartment. It was the exact same floor and layout, but in a completely different building, 3 buildings over. She pounded on the door, and when no one answered, she decided to climb over the balcony and smash through the sliding glass door. After a while, she must have realized it wasn't her place and ran off, leaving behind broken glass and blood from the cuts on her hands and arms. She made it back to her actual apartment, barely cleaned herself up, and passed out in her room. The next morning, there was a knock on the door from the police asking for her. She came out wearing the same clothes from the night before, still covered in blood, and was arrested on the spot for breaking and entering. It turned out the neighbors who lived above the apartment she broke into had watched the whole thing and yelled down at her the entire time, telling her she was in the wrong place. She apparently told them to mind their own business before smashing through the glass door. They didn't know who she was, but called the police when they saw her running away. The kicker? When the police searched the apartment, they found her wallet and ID sitting on the counter. She had left it there in her drunken state. I've got a couple more wild stories about her, but after college, she quickly married a preacher and cut ties with her old friends. Story 35. I had a dog before I started a relationship with my ex. She always made it clear that it's your dog, so you take care of her. By this point, we had a child together, so I was still going over there occasionally and driving my son to her place after daycare. Our bedroom was in the basement, along with my dog's crate. One day, I went down to put laundry in and noticed a horrible smell. I saw a tied-up bag next to my dog's crate, assumed my dog had an accident, and tossed it in the outside bin. The next day, I was back over there and went to look under the stairs near the crate for some of my things. The smell was back. This time the bag was open, with no wipes or paper inside, just urine and a terrible stench. I also noticed a foul smell coming from the basin sink used for the washer drain. I was confused because anytime my dog had an accident in the past, my ex made a huge deal out of it and left it for me to clean. This went on for a few days until I finally said, I think I need to bring Kaja to the vet. She asked why, and I told her, she's had accidents every day for the past 2 weeks, hasn't she? That's when I got the truth. My ex admitted she hadn't been going upstairs to use the only bathroom in the townhouse. Instead, she had been defecating in bags in the basement and urinating in the basin sink. We are not back together. Story 36. A person we hired at my office developed a crush on me. Not a huge deal. She added me on Facebook. Fine. Then she sent me a long message coming out to me. That was also fine. I didn't mind at all, and honestly just felt sorry for her because she seemed lonely and felt like she had to keep her orientation a secret. The next day I log into Facebook and have hundreds of notifications because she went through and liked, loved, or commented on every single photo I had ever posted. I didn't remove her, but I blocked her from seeing new posts, my friends list, and so on. One day at lunch, she called me. I didn't answer. She left a message saying her car had broken down by my house, which was strange because I had never told her where I lived, and asked if I could give her a ride back to work. I ignored it. She somehow made it back without her car, and I didn't see her for the rest of the day, until that evening. I was saying goodbye to a friend when I noticed her across the street from my house talking to my neighbor. I turned off all the lights, locked the door, and waited it out. Eventually, I heard a tow truck and she was gone. I'm convinced she staged the car breakdown. She was laid off a few days later, unrelated to me since we worked in different departments, but she still stalked me. I ended up getting a security camera and threatening to call the police. For what it's worth, I don't think she was dangerous, just extremely lonely. I showed her a bit of kindness, and she didn't know how to handle it. She still checks my social media from time to time, once even making a fake Instagram account to flirt with me via private message. Her unusual grammar made it obvious it was her. I just blocked the account and moved on. Story 37. I was friends with one of my former best friend's exes, which sounds questionable, I know. She was still hanging out with him at the time. He had pretty bad depression, or at least talked about it constantly. That summer, I started spending more time around both of them, and while there were some good times, things got weird quickly. They weren't officially together, but he wanted to be. Whenever she spent time with other guys, he would threaten to take his own life and blow up my phone with texts and calls, making it my job to save him. One night, my friend was out with another guy, and sure enough, he called me from right by the train tracks. I could hear the bells in the train approaching as he told me he was going to step in front of it. I told him I would call the police. By then, I was fed up with his behavior. He had been doing this for months, constantly talking about suicide, but never actually following through, just using it to manipulate situations. When I said I'd call the cops, he suddenly replied, "Oh, hey, I feel better. Sorry for the scare. I'm going home now." That was when I started to see the pattern. My friend was stuck in an emotionally abusive situation. He used manipulation and guilt to keep her close and make her feel bad for spending time without him. Thankfully, they're no longer together. She still talks to him occasionally, which worries me, but I hope she stays clear of all that chaos. It took me a year to realize how toxic he was, but once I did, I cut off all contact and haven't spoken to him in 4 years. Whether he truly has depression or not, I know he was dishonest about a lot of things, and I refuse to ever get involved with him again. Story 38. When I was in high school, I had an internship with a local chef. Partway through the year, she left for another job, and I continued my internship with the new chef they hired. At 13, I thought he was pretty cool. He would tell me stories about his previous restaurants, his famous chef friends, and all the amazing dishes he had created. Then he would leave me alone, sometimes for hours, while he went off to do who knows what. He always came back overly excited to try new things in the kitchen. It turns out he was a compulsive liar, a con artist, and was leaving during work to get high. At the time, I didn't recognize the signs. I just thought, wow, what a creative and funny guy. I later learned he was on multiple substances, including speed. One day he overdosed and ended up in the hospital. But instead of telling the truth, he made up a story about having pertussis, whooping cough. He didn't have any symptoms, and his story didn't make sense. He was in his 40s, vaccinated, and it was incredibly rare for someone his age to catch it. The lie was so bad that the restaurant owners started digging deeper. They soon discovered that he had stolen tens of thousands of dollars from the restaurant, lost custody of his children due to his drug addiction, and had a long history of dishonesty. Looking back, it's hard to believe how much I missed at the time. Story 39. A friend of mine asked if she could store some of her belongings at my place until her new home was ready. I had a spare bedroom I wasn't using, so I told her it was fine as long as everything fit in that room. She said she'd call me after work that evening, once she got her schedule, so we could arrange a time to unload her things. A week passed with no call, so I figured she had found another place to store her stuff. Then out of nowhere one evening, I got a text from her saying her sister and brother-in-law were already on their way with a truck to pick up her things and bring them over to my apartment. I told her that wouldn't work because I wasn't home, and I asked if they could reschedule for the next morning. She immediately called me and started going off, saying I was being rude to her family and that I needed to come home right away because I had told her she could store her things there. I reminded her that yes, I had agreed to let her use the space, but it wasn't my fault she hadn't checked in beforehand to arrange a good time, like we had originally agreed. She brushed me off, said whatever, and hung up. A couple of hours later, I got a call from my neighbor saying there was a group of people at my apartment who had just forced the door open and gone inside. Thinking it was a break-in, I immediately hung up, called the police, and drove home as fast as I could. When I arrived, I saw my friend and her sister shouting at my neighbor while her brother-in-law unloaded her things from his truck into my apartment. She had decided to come anyway and just let herself in. The police arrived, separated everyone, and calmed the situation down. They asked if I wanted to press charges, but since nothing was stolen and I knew my landlord would replace the door frame, I just told them to have her load her belongings back up and leave the property. The entire time she kept telling me I was a terrible person who goes back on my word, completely unable to understand why what she did was wrong. That was the moment I decided it was best for us to go our separate ways. Story 40. When my wife and I were dating in high school and college, her sister-in-law seemed like a nice person. Even at the bridal shower I attended, where I ended up having a few too many drinks with one of my groomsmen, she came across as fine. My wife had told me stories about her being difficult, but I couldn't see it at the time. Once my wife and I got married, though, the truth started to surface. Her sister-in-law forced her husband to buy and move into 3 different homes in just 2 years, each one more expensive than the last, all on his single income. She also traded in 5 SUVs in that same period, rolling over the old loan into the new one each time, making the payments even higher. One day I went over to help my brother-in-law move furniture into yet another house they couldn't really afford. While we were there, she kept yelling at him, saying he wasn't doing enough for the family and threatening to take the kids to someone who could take better care of them. Later that night after I had left, my brother-in-law instinctively raised his hand to block a slap from her, and his hand accidentally brushed the side of her face. She called the police, decided to leave him, and drained what little money he had left. This actually worked out for my wife and me in one way. We were buying our first home, and since he had to sell the house and get rid of everything, we gave him $1,000 to put toward his divorce lawyer in exchange for picking whatever furniture we wanted. We ended up with a top-of-the-line washer and dryer, worth $2,000 each, a dining room table, 2 couches, plates, rugs, curtains, and more. Meanwhile, she had him paying for her and the kids to live in an apartment while he moved back in with my in-laws. Over the next 5.5 months, things were good. My brother-in-law came over often for dinner, helped me with home projects. I had no clue what I was doing as a new homeowner, watched hockey games, and even lost 30 pounds. Then my mother-in-law called and said they were getting back together and moving back into the house, which still hadn't sold. Now they live there with barely any furniture. She still doesn't have a job, and my brother-in-law won't speak to my wife or me because we refuse to support a relationship we know is going to destroy him in the long run.